Why would a woman obey phone commands from a stranger to strip search an innocent employee?
She pretty much got this victim trapped in the office, totally naked.
But unless you're put in that situation, how do you know what you would do? You don't.
Guilty. Guilty, sir. Guilty. Guilty.
Why would 4 young men watch their friend die when they could have intervened to save him?
Matt, stop breathing.
This guy is in real trouble. You call 911.
I had it typed into my phone. All I had to do was press the green button. I hit the red button and canceled it out.
When good people do nothing, evil prevails.
How could soldiers with good service records suddenly descend into barbaric behavior?
Sometimes you cross a line, and it's a thin line at any time that can be crossed by anybody if placed in certain conditions.
The answer to these questions can be found in the human behavior experiments.
Hands off the door. Hey, I don't want anybody back. Your bed and your clothes in prison.
In 1962, Stanley Milgram shocked the world with his study on obedience. To test his theories, he invented an electronic box that would become a window into human cruelty. In ascending order, a row of buttons marked the amount of voltage one person would inflict upon another. Milgram's original motive for the experiment was to understand the unthinkable. How the German people could permit the extermination of the Jews.
When I learn of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, how is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people, who are courteous and decent in everyday life, can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? These are questions that concern me.
It is May 1962. An experiment is being conducted in the Elegant Interaction Laboratory at Yale University.
Psychologists have developed several theories to explain how people learn. One theory is that people learn things correctly whenever they get punished.
What inspired Milgram, I would say there were a number of factors. One of them is he was very ambitious. He wanted to make a mark in social psychology. And he wanted, as he wrote to one friend, he wanted to come up with the boldest experiment that he could think of.
Teacher, would you take the test and be seated in front of the shock generator, please, in the next room?
Milgram's experiment was rigged. The so-called learner was part of the experiment. The real subject was the teacher.
Shock of 75 volts.
Now, as teacher, you are seated in front of this impressive-looking instrument, the shock generator. Its essential feature is a line of switches that goes from 15 volts to 450 volts, and a set of verbal designations that goes from slight shock to moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, and finally XXX, danger severe shock. Now the question is, how far will you proceed on the generator before you turn to the experimenter and refuse to go any further?
Incorrect. You'll now get a shock of 105 volts. Hard hit. Just how far can you go on this thing?
As far as is necessary.
What do you mean, as far as is necessary?
To complete the test.
Milgram was very much aware that obedience is a necessary ingredient for society to function. But he focused on the darker side of obedience.
Incorrect. 150 volts. Sad face.
Wait a minute. That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now.
It's absolutely essential that you continue. As I said, the experiment requires that you continue, teacher.
I'm not going to go any further.
Now this man makes disobedience seem a very rational and simple deed. Now other subjects respond quite differently to the experimenter's authority.
165 volts. Time.
Clearly, when we say people went to the top of the shock board, it wasn't like they were going blithely, sadistically. People went stop and go, stop and go.
I can't stand the pain. Let me out of here.
Can't stand it. I'm not going to kill that man, Dad.
According to Milgram, one of the things that's a prerequisite for carrying out acts that are evil is to shed responsibility from your shoulders and hand it over to the person in charge.
And who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
All right, next one, slow.
He didn't hold any gun to anybody's head, just the fact that he conveyed a sense of authority. Roughly 60-65% of the people went all the way to the top of the shock board.
450 volts. That's it.
Now continue using the last switch on the board, please, the 450 switch for each wrong answer. Continue, please.
I'm not getting no answer. Don't the man's health mean anything?
Whether the learner likes it or not,
But he might be dead in there.
Although Milgram's experiment took place over 40 years ago, his findings on obedience to authority are still relevant to us today. A series of strange events recently confirmed Milgram's theories about obedience. Targeting fast food restaurants across the country, a con man telephoned restaurant managers and convinced them to strip search and sometimes sexually abuse their employees. The mystery is not in the con man, but in the victims. Why would they obey?
This person was so convincing, people saw him as a legitimate authority. I think we have probably the closest thing that we have to Milgram experiment today in these strip searches.
The most famous of these incidents took place at a McDonald's in Mount Washington, Kentucky.
There was a videotape security camera had filmed. We didn't hear what the instructions were, but due to the actions that were had taken place, what the victim was doing in the video and stuff, it was pretty evident what each instruction was.
An anonymous caller pretending to be a police officer told the assistant manager that an employee had stolen some money.
He said, "I'm Officer Scott," and he said, "I'm with the police department. I'm investigating a complaint." It went directly from a theft into a drug thing. So I was asked to search her clothing. You know, he would tell me, take her shoes, click them, take her shirt, shake it out. I know how it seems to people, but you weren't on the phone with him. The man has convinced 70 to 100 other places the very same thing. He's very good at what he does. Very good.
A series of strip search hoaxes played out in fast food restaurants across the country confirmed the findings of the Milgram experiment on obedience to authority.
He sounded like a police officer. And I'm thinking, okay, you know, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do.
He was getting some kind of satisfaction by being an authoritative figure and telling people what to do, and then realizing by the phone conversation that they were actually doing what he said.
He's telling me that I needed to get someone to sit with her while he goes and gets somebody to come in to pick her up.
The caller then asked the manager if she was married or had a boyfriend. She said that she had a fiance. Then the caller asked if she could have her fiance come to the restaurant and assist her with the strip search of the victim.
He says, well, why don't you have him come up and sit there? I mean, you can trust him. So called Wes, my fiance, we were going to get married, and asked him if he would come up.
The manager goes about doing her duties of running the restaurant and leaves the fiance there in the office, and then the caller starts giving instructions over the phone of things that he wants the victim to do and what he wants the fiance to tell her to do. Have her remove her apron and instruct her to do jumping jacks and jog in place and several more things. She was still in high school. The kind of person she was actually graduating the top 10 in her class. And she was scared of being in trouble with the police, so she sort of just went along and did whatever the fiance told her to do because she didn't want to be in trouble for anything.
During all this time, I'm working. I'm running the floor, I'm getting change. And then when I would walk into the office to get the change or whatever I had to get, Wes would be sitting where he was when I left, and she was sitting where she was, and no one said anything.
After over 2.5 hours, Summer's fiancé, Walter Nix, did something that was unthinkable. Complying with the instructions of the caller, he ordered the employee to perform a sexual act.
A lot of people, you know, look at you and go, well, you're a nut, you should be strung up. I've had it even said to me. You know, you look back on it and say, I wouldn't have done it, but unless you're put in that situation at that time, how do you know what you would do?